In an alternate version of the Star Wars saga, Anakin Skywalker doesn't fall to the dark side through manipulation by Emperor Palpatine alone. Instead, he chooses his path with greater clarity, driven by his love for Padme and a fierce desire to end the Republic's corruption. However, his journey towards ultimate power comes at a high cost, as his darkest victory becomes a devastating point of no return. Story: Anakin Skywalker's power in the Force grows exponentially as he begins to understand the full scope of his abilities. After learning of Padme's death in childbirth as it happens in the original timeline, Anakin's emotions tear him apart, but instead of falling victim to Palpatine's dark influence, Anakin decides to break away from the Jedi and Sith traditions alike, creating his own path. In this version, Anakin's victory comes through the eradication of the corrupt Senate, replacing it with a new regime. He does not embrace Sith teachings fully, but instead forges a more authoritarian rule, believing that only through fear and control can peace be established. Anakin's ultimate betrayal occurs when he takes down the Republic, destroying its core institutions and setting himself on a throne, ruling the galaxy with an iron fist. However, this victory comes at the cost of everything Anakin once loved: the Jedi, the Force, and even his own humanity. The consequences of his actions are dire, as Anakin becomes a figure of fear, not only to the galaxy but to himself. His darkest victory proves that power, once claimed, is not easily relinquished, and he finds himself trapped in a cycle of tyranny and regret. Anakin Skywalker stood on the precipice of something far greater than the Jedi Order had ever imagined, a power that the galaxy itself feared. His thoughts, once rooted in the principles of the Jedi, now swirled with doubts, anger, and a longing for control. For years, he had fought alongside the Jedi, defending a republic that, to his eyes, was built on lies. He had witnessed corruption infecting every level of government, senators driven by greed and self-interest, and the Jedi themselves, who were nothing more than pawns in a game they could never fully understand. Anakin's desire for power wasn't born from the same place as other Sith. It wasn't about blind ambition or hate for the Jedi alone. No, his was a deeper longing, a need to reshape the galaxy into something pure, something he could control. He had seen firsthand how the Republic failed, how it faltered when the people needed it the most. The Jedi, with their strict code, were powerless to stop the corruption. Anakin was different. He knew he could bring order. He could be the one to stop the war and bring peace to the galaxy. His disillusionment with the Jedi grew as he saw their reluctance to act. They had no answers for the chaos that surrounded them, no vision for the future that inspired him. The Jedi refused to take the bold actions necessary to change the course of history, and Anakin realized that their ideals were part of the problem. The Jedi sought peace through diplomacy, but the galaxy was too broken for such fragile measures. Every day, Anakin's feelings grew stronger. His longing for power became an obsession. He could end the war, he could make things right, but to do so, he had to rise above the Jedi, above the Republic. He could no longer stand by and watch them fail. Power was the only way forward. Power would bring peace, even if it meant sacrificing everything he had once held dear. Anakin began to see his path clearly. The Jedi were obstacles, and the Republic was a dying system. He needed to break free from the chains that had bound him for so long. The galaxy would be his to control, and only then would peace truly reign. The death of Padme Amidala struck Anakin Skywalker harder than anything else in his life. He had fought so fiercely to protect her, yet in the end he couldn't prevent the very tragedy he feared most. As Padme's life slipped away during childbirth, Anakin's heart shattered, and a storm of grief tore through his soul. In the original timeline, this loss pushed Anakin into the arms of Emperor Palpatine, allowing the Sith to manipulate him further down the dark path. But in this alternate reality, Anakin's grief becomes something more. Instead of succumbing to the dark side, he channels his anger and sorrow into something radical. He decides that the galaxy must change. The Republic had failed Padme, failed him, and failed so many others. Anakin could no longer trust the institutions that promised peace but delivered chaos. His grief becomes a catalyst for revolution. Anakin no longer views the Jedi as a force for good. Their doctrines seem like a way of maintaining the status quo, serving the very system that allowed Padme to die. He begins to see the Jedi not as defenders of peace, but as pawns of the Republic, entangled in its corruption. With his formidable power, Anakin takes action. He begins to gather those who share his disillusionment, disgruntled clones, former Jedi, and rebels alike. Together, they form a new faction, one that will rise above the old Republic and the Sith. Anakin's vision for the galaxy becomes clear: a new order, a new government, one that would be led by someone who truly understood the galaxy's pain. As Anakin builds his army, his loss of Padme fuels his every decision. His love for her and the pain of her death become the driving forces of his revolution. He no longer sees himself as a Jedi, nor as a Sith. He is something else, a force of change, willing to break down everything in his path for the sake of a better future. His heart, broken and angry, is now focused on one goal: to reshape the galaxy in a way that would honor Padme's memory and prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. Anakin Skywalker's mastery of the Force had grown beyond anything the Jedi I had anticipated. His connection to the Force was deep, intense, and at times uncontrollable, but it was this power that made him increasingly skeptical of the Jedi Order. He believed they were holding him back, limiting his potential with their rigid rules and dogmatic approach to the Force. The more Anakin understood the vastness of his power, the more he questioned the Jedi's belief in balance and restraint. He saw them as hypocrites, trying to control a force that was meant to be free. The Jedi Council, once his mentors, now seemed like distant figures, too bound by their codes to see the galaxy for what it truly was. Anakin's anger grew, fueled by his personal loss and the fear of losing those he loved. He began to see the Jedi as a hindrance, standing in the way of what the galaxy truly needed: a strong, decisive leader. In his eyes, the Jedi were weak, tied to their ancient beliefs that held the galaxy in a perpetual state of turmoil. They failed to act when the galaxy needed them most, and Anakin became convinced that they were the true problem, not the Sith. The turning point came when Anakin realized that his future could no longer be shaped by the Jedi. He was no longer just the chosen one, bound to their will. He was a force in his own right, capable of reshaping the galaxy as he saw fit. He began to challenge the Jedi, using his powers not only to defeat them, but to expose the hypocrisy that lay within their ranks. One by one, he dismantled their influence, eliminating those who opposed him and forcing others to bend to his will. Anakin's final act of defiance was the complete destruction of the Jedi Order. He believed that only through this radical action could true peace be established in the galaxy. No longer would the Jedi be allowed to control the Force or dictate the fate of the galaxy. With the Order gone, Anakin felt a sense of liberation, but it came with the realization that the path he had chosen would forever change him. The galaxy, now without the Jedi, would be under his rule. Anakin Skywalker stood at the edge of destiny, torn between loyalty to the Jedi and his growing belief that the Republic was beyond saving. Chancellor Palpatine, the Dark Lord of the Sith, saw this conflict as his final opportunity. Whispering lies and promises of power, he tried to sway Anakin to the dark side. He spoke of Padme's death, of the Jedi's hypocrisy, and of powers that could save those Anakin loved. But unlike the original timeline, something inside Anakin shifted. He saw through the deception. He remembered the faces of Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ahsoka Tano, and even Master Yoda, mentors who had guided him with honesty even in their flaws. The dark promises Palpatine offered began to ring hollow. The fear that once clouded his mind gave way to clarity. Anakin realized that Palpatine was the true threat, not the Jedi. In a tense confrontation inside the Chancellor's office, Anakin ignited his lightsaber. Palpatine revealed his full Sith power, unleashing a storm of lightning and rage. But Anakin, strengthened by a newfound sense of purpose, stood firm. The battle was fierce, blue blade against crimson lightning. The room shook with the fury of their duel. Then, in a moment of pure will, Anakin struck Palpatine down. The Sith Lord's final scream echoed through the halls of power as his lifeless body crumbled to the ground. Anakin stood over him, breathing heavily, not in victory, but in transformation. He had rejected both the Jedi's passivity and the Sith's corruption. The galaxy no longer had a puppet master, but Anakin knew that without action, chaos would follow. The Senate, already weakened by years of war, was in no shape to lead. The Jedi Council had been dismantled, so Anakin took control, not as a Sith, not as a Jedi, but as a ruler who believed peace required strength. He declared a new order, one ruled by him alone. Many cheered, others trembled. Anakin had saved the galaxy from the shadows, but in doing so he became a shadow himself, a hero who won by refusing darkness, only to find it within his own victory. In the ashes of the fallen Republic, Anakin Skywalker rose, not as a Jedi, not as a Sith, but as something entirely new. He cast aside the teachings of the Jedi and the lies of the Sith. He no longer believed in balance. He believed in control. With the death of Emperor Palpatine, Anakin seized the throne not as Darth Vader, but as Emperor Skywalker. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as this powerful warrior declared a new era. The Clone Wars had ended, the Senate was dissolved, and the Jedi were no more. In their place stood a single figure, young, strong, and determined to bring order at any cost. Anakin believed chaos was the true enemy. Democracy, he thought, had failed. It had allowed corruption, greed, and endless war, so he outlawed all forms of opposition. The Force, once seen as a spiritual path, became a tool of enforcement. Force users were drafted into his new regime or hunted down if they resisted. Temples turned to academies. Lightsabers became symbols of obedience, not freedom. He constructed a vast palace on Coruscant, black and towering, overlooking the ruins of the old Senate chamber. Across the stars, systems were brought to heel. Any planet that refused allegiance was swiftly conquered. Dissenters vanished. Citizens were watched. Peace came, but it was peace born of fear. Obi-Wan Kenobi, one of the few Jedi survivors, watched from exile. He had once believed Anakin was the chosen one, destined to bring balance to the Force. But what he saw now was not balance. It was domination. Padme's memory haunted Anakin, but he buried it beneath iron rule. He told himself this was the only way. If the galaxy was to survive, it must obey. He no longer dreamed of love or freedom, only control. The people called him emperor, but he saw himself as a guardian. A protector who would never again allow weakness to destroy what he loved. Yet with every system brought under his command, Anakin grew colder, more distant from who he once was. And so, the galaxy entered a new age. Not of light, not of dark, but of silence. A silence ruled by the heavy breath of one man who believed that order, no matter the cost, was worth everything. Anakin Skywalker, once a celebrated hero of the Clone Wars, now stood alone in the vast halls of his palace on Coruscant. The cold silence echoed louder than any battlefield he had ever fought on. After defeating both the Jedi Order and Emperor Palpatine, Anakin had claimed control of the galaxy, not as a Sith and not as a Jedi, but as something entirely his own. His rule brought peace, but it came at a heavy cost. Gone were the days of laughter and companionship. Obi-Wan Kenobi, his former master and closest friend, had vanished into exile. Padme Amidala, the love of his life, had died in heartbreak and mystery. The galaxy had been reshaped in his image, yet the one thing he could never shape was the emptiness in his heart. The people respected him, yes, they bowed when he passed, they obeyed without question. But behind every respectful nod was a trace of fear. Mothers pulled their children close when he appeared. Senators chose their words carefully, never daring to speak against his will. Anakin had become a symbol of unstoppable power. His armor shone like the stars, his voice carried across systems, but power had isolated him. No one challenged him anymore. No one questioned his choices, and with each passing day, the loneliness grew heavier. Even the Force felt distant. What once flowed freely through him now whispered from the shadows, as if unsure of what he had become. He wandered the palace chambers at night, looking for signs of the man he used to be. But all he found were ghosts, memories of a boy who dreamed of freeing the galaxy, and a husband who only wanted to save his wife. He visited the Jedi Temple ruins, now a monument to his dominance. Standing alone among the broken columns, Anakin asked aloud, was it worth it? There was no answer. Only silence, the kind that follows victory when no one remains to celebrate. In the end, Anakin Skywalker ruled the galaxy, but he did so from a throne of solitude, where fear replaced love and power replaced peace. Anakin Skywalker stood alone in the grand convocation chamber of the Galactic Senate, the hollow echoes of silence bouncing off the towering pillars. Once a place of spirited debate and diplomacy, the Senate had become a nest of corruption, its members more concerned with personal power than the good of the galaxy. He ignited his blue lightsaber, its hum slicing through the stillness. The senators had gathered, unaware that their time had run out. They believed they could control him, or at least reason with him. But Anakin was no longer a Jedi, bound by their code, nor a Sith obeying the will of Darth Sidious. He was something far more dangerous, free and angry. Anakin walked slowly toward the Chancellor's podium. The remaining senators pleaded, shouted, even offered bribes, but Anakin heard nothing. His mind was focused. He had seen too much war, too much pain. The Jedi had failed, the Sith had lied, and now the Senate would fall. With a sweeping motion of the Force, Anakin crushed the foundations of the central platform, sending dozens of senators plunging into the depths below. Screams filled the chamber as others tried to flee, but Anakin moved like a shadow, cutting through those who dared to resist. Bail Organa tried to intervene, begging Anakin to stop. "This isn't the way," he cried. But Anakin looked at him with hollow eyes. "The galaxy needs order, not more speeches." Anakin replied coldly before turning away. He unleashed a wave of force energy that shattered windows and collapsed balconies. Fires erupted. Droids scrambled in panic. Emergency alarms howled across Coruscant, but no one could reach the Senate in time. In mere minutes, the heart of the Republic was destroyed. Anakin stood amid the wreckage, breathing heavily, eyes burning with fury and grief. The great hall, once filled with voices from across the stars, now echoed only with silence and flame. Outside, the holoscreens declared the end of the Republic, and rising from its ashes, Anakin Skywalker proclaimed the birth of a new galactic order, one ruled by power, fear, and unshakable will. He believed he had saved the galaxy, but deep within, he knew there would be no turning back. Anakin Skywalker stood alone on the balcony of his towering citadel, the twin suns of Coruscant setting behind him. The city world glowed beneath his reign, yet in the silence of his chamber there was no peace. The war was over, the Republic was gone, the Jedi were no more, and he had done it all with his own hands. But with the galaxy at his feet, Anakin's thoughts were louder than any rebellion. They whispered to him in the quiet moments voices of the past, the screams of Jedi he once called brothers, the soft words of Obi Wan before their final duel. Each memory cut deeper than any lightsaber ever could. No enemy in the galaxy could wound him as deeply as his own mind. At night, he dreamed of Padme, her smile, her voice, her tears. He had promised to save her, to protect her from death. Instead, she died afraid of the man he had become. He remembered the look in her eyes when she begged him to stop. That memory haunted him more than any battlefield. The people cheered his name across the stars, but it only echoed the loneliness within. There was no Jedi council to challenge him, no Sith master to command him. He had destroyed them all. Now the only counsel he kept was guilt, a heavy, invisible chain around his spirit. Sometimes Anakin would return to the Jedi temple ruins. He walked those broken halls alone, the ghosts of younglings and masters lingering in every shadow. He had once believed they were enemies of peace, obstacles in the path to saving lives, but now he wasn't sure. Perhaps he had become the very monster they had feared. Anakin Skywalker, once the chosen one, had won the war, but what he had lost could never be recovered. In his quest for control, he had destroyed not just the old order, but his own soul. The Force no longer sang to him, it remained silent, as if mourning what he had become. Now the mightiest man in the galaxy fought a war no one could see, a personal war, one he could never win. Anakin Skywalker stood alone at the highest tower of the Imperial Palace on Coruscant, gazing down at the galaxy he now ruled. The stars were the same, the planets still spun in their orbits, but the light of hope had faded. The screams of war had silenced, replaced by the quiet tension of fear. Peace had come, not through unity or understanding, but through submission and control. He had ended the clone wars, dismantled the corrupt Republic, and wiped out the Jedi Order. The galaxy was his, but the price he paid echoed louder than any blaster. Anakin once dreamed of saving lives, of protecting the innocent, and of bringing balance to the Force, but in his pursuit of peace, he had burned every bridge that led back to the man he used to be. The name Anakin Skywalker still lived in history, but only as a tyrant who killed his brothers, betrayed his teachings, and ruled with an iron will. He thought of Padme, her voice still haunting his memories. She had once believed in him more than anyone, even when the Jedi Council doubted him. He had promised her peace, a future where their children would live freely. Yet that future died with her. Now the galaxy feared his name, and his own reflection in the polished glass no longer looked familiar. Children bowed in his presence, not out of respect, but terror. Citizens obeyed his rule, not because they believed in his cause, but because they feared his wrath. He had become the very monster he once swore to destroy. In the silence of the night, Anakin often walked the halls of the temple he once called home. Now a cold fortress of power. Statues of fallen Jedi had been torn down, replaced with banners of his empire. Each step echoed with the ghosts of his past. He had won, he had brought peace, but peace forged in fear was not peace at all. And as he stared at the stars, Anakin Skywalker felt the unbearable weight of his darkest victory. A galaxy at peace, and a soul in chains. Anakin Skywalker stood at the edge of the Imperial throne room, his eyes scanning the stars beyond Coruscant. The galaxy was quiet. too quiet. He had done it. The Jedi were gone, the Senate reduced to ashes. Darth Sidious had been slain by Anakin's own blade. The clone troopers now served only him. What was once the Republic was now the Galactic Empire, his empire. But power, even in its purest form, brought no peace to Anakin's soul. The voices of the fallen Jedi echoed in his mind. Obi-Wan's pleading eyes, Mace Windu's final shout, even Yoda's distant wisdom haunted him. He had won, yet he had lost everything. He remembered Padme, her warm touch, her hopeful smile, her final breath. He thought power would save her. He thought if he became strong enough, he could stop death. But she was gone, and now the child she carried was lost to him as well. Anakin wore no Sith title. He refused to call himself Darth. He was neither Jedi nor Sith, just a man who had taken control of a galaxy in the name of peace, and chained it in fear. Star systems bowed not out of loyalty, but terror. Stormtroopers patrolled every planet. Dissent was crushed without mercy. The Force, once a guide, now felt cold in his grasp. It no longer whispered. It only judged. Alone in his throne room, Anakin removed his black cloak and stared into the shadows. His reflection on the polished floor no longer looked like the man once called the Chosen One. His eyes were sharp, but lifeless. His heart, once filled with dreams, now beat only for order. The galaxy was his, but the cost had been too high. Love had withered, hope had vanished. And Anakin Skywalker, the boy from Tatooine who once dreamed of freeing slaves, had become a tyrant of his own making. This was his darkest victory, a throne built on ashes, a crown forged in grief, and in the silence of his empire, Anakin finally realized the truth. He had not saved the galaxy, he had enslaved it with his own hands.